The construction began before the first stone. It started as a problem no one could hide. How do you build something that cannot fail, with no machines, no margin, no retreat? This wasn't about raising walls. It was an entire system running at once. A stable foundation, a continuous flow, precision with no visible error. Because here, failure wasn't subtle. Error didn't stay hidden. It showed up and stayed. That changes everything. The project stops being grand. It becomes risky. Every decision carries direct consequence. Every delay pressures the whole. Every wrong measure contaminates what comes next. The hypothesis begins here. It wasn't just a temple. It was an operation at the edge, where everything had to work before it could mean anything. Thousands enter this system. Cutting stone, transporting wood, measuring joints, no real pause, no room for trial, no second chance to fail. And then the question that holds it all together appears. Was it extraordinary precision? Or a system so fragile it almost shouldn't exist? The first step wasn't building. It was choosing where it wouldn't collapse. The problem was immediate. The ground couldn't give way. Access couldn't fail. Authority couldn't be questioned. Choose wrong, and everything is doomed before it begins. The Mount in Jerusalem solves that. Height, control, visibility. A point that dominates the city without needing explanation. It wasn't scenery. It was part of the system. But that choice comes at a cost. Now there's no retreat, no later adjustment. Everything has to work. There. And that tightens every side. The worker doesn't improvise. The leader doesn't revise without exposure. The priest doesn't tolerate deviation. The project is born as a gamble, precise, exact, irreversible. If the ground fails, it's not just structure. It's the beginning of a full crisis. Then the next problem emerges. How do you feed something that cannot stop? The materials weren't there. Stone, yes, but the rest came from far away. Quality timber, refined metal, elements that demand time, distance, and coordination. If the flow breaks, the work stops. And a stopped project speaks for itself. The solution crosses borders, an alliance. Routes opened between territories, cedars cut in Lebanon, sent down by sea, then carried by land to Jerusalem. This isn't transport, it's synchronization. Woodcutters on the right rhythm, ships at the exact time, carriers without delay. One link fails and nothing arrives. Without material, there is no construction, and the weight shifts from physical to continuous. There's no pause in a synchronized system. An error in cutting doesn't affect one piece. It pushes the entire timeline. A delay on the route isn't local. It freezes everything at once. At this point, something becomes clear. The construction isn't even finished, but it already depends on something bigger than stone, wood, or strength. It depends on constant balance, and balance rarely holds without cost. Then a new tension emerges, silent, constant. How do you ensure everything arrives on time, without anything getting lost along the way? Because the temple didn't yet exist in stone. It existed as flow, and flow cannot stop. But bringing materials doesn't solve everything. In fact, it creates another risk, more discreet, more dangerous. How do you make each piece arrive ready, with no final adjustment? The text reveals a detail that changes everything. The stones were already cut. No sound of tools on the mount, no cutting, no correction. Absolute silence. This isn't aesthetic. It's a technical decision. If adjustments were made there, the site would become unstable. Error upon error, noise, rework, and disorder. In a space that needed to be born precise, that would be enough to compromise everything. The solution shifts the risk. It removes it from the final moment and pushes it earlier. The real work happens far away, out of sight, in the quarries, stones cut, measurements defined, no real test at the destination, and that changes the game. Error doesn't show at the origin. It travels hidden, and only reveals itself in the fit, when there's no turning back. Each piece has to arrive, as if it already knows where it belongs, and that transforms the pressure. Error is no longer fixable. A wrong cut doesn't delay, it blocks. An imprecise measure doesn't affect a part, it misaligns the whole. The construction moves forward in silence, but it isn't calm. It's containment, because any failure is already inside the structure, waiting for the moment to appear. When the pieces begin to fit together, another problem emerges, more complex than cutting or transporting. How do you turn all this into something that works? Because the temple wasn't just structure, it was a system. Courtyards, chambers, restricted zones, each space with a function, each access controlled. If this fails, the building may exist, but it doesn't operate. The account shows something precise. This wasn't just about raising walls. It was about integrating everything. Coverings, utensils, passages. Nothing stood alone. Gold wasn't just symbolic. It sealed, protected, defined boundaries. Every detail had a function before it had meaning. And here, the challenge shifts. It's no longer just construction. It's total coordination, architecture, and ritual at the same time. A spatial error doesn't block movement. It breaks the system. A wrong access isn't a deviation. It's total failure, and the pressure shifts again. Before, the risk was visible. Stone, wood, weight. Now, it hides. In logic, in organization, in what cannot be seen. Craftsmen build with no aesthetic margin, no functional margin. Priests wait with no absolute guarantee. Because everything depends on something not yet tested. Then the construction reaches its limit. There's no return. Until now, errors could be absorbed, corrected beforehand, hidden in the process. But that ends now. The coverings close. The utensils enter. Everything takes its final form. And then comes the moment that changes everything. Preparation to receive the ark. There is no more adjustment. What was built must now work, or it becomes useless at the most critical instant. The problem is no longer structural. It's total. If something fails here, it won't be seen as a defect. It will be failure of everything, of the entire system, of the king, of the priests, of legitimacy itself. The risk changes form, from technical to absolute. And then the moment arrives. The ark must enter. No rehearsal, no test. Everything that was built will be tested at once. This is the point of no return. Structure, space, and function now become one. If it fails, there's no way to isolate it. The failure spreads and takes everything with it. The tension shifts again. Physical exhaustion disappears. Something else remains. Silent, collective. No one can intervene anymore. The workers stop. The craftsmen don't correct. The priests only wait. The project has crossed a boundary, and there is no way back. When the ark enters, it won't be a symbol. It will be a test. The only one possible. If it works, everything holds. If not, nothing ever worked. The final moment isn't ceremony. It's verification. The ark is brought in, step by step, carried to the interior. Every previous stage converges here. Ground, logistics, cutting, fitting. Everything meets this point. And the question remains, is the system real or just appearance? There is no middle ground. Either it works or it reveals itself as empty. The priests enter, they position the ark, and then something changes. The environment responds. A cloud fills the space, dense, impossible to ignore. The priests step back, not by choice, by limit. The system did not fail. It worked. The structure held. The space responded. The purpose was confirmed. This is the climax, not of appearance, but of endurance. Everything was pushed to the edge, and it did not collapse. The consequence is silent. The workers disappear. The craftsmen no longer matter. The priests no longer control. And the king depends on something he cannot guarantee. The construction reaches its final point. Either everything is confirmed or everything loses value. Here, it is confirmed. And then something deeper emerges. The temple is not just a structure, it is proof that complex systems do not survive on appearance. They survive on coherence. Every stage existed to prevent collapse. The ground holds, the flow continues, the pieces fit, the spaces function. Nothing depended on luck. Everything had to operate under constant pressure. And that changes the reading. It's not just a symbol, it's organization pushed to the edge, where politics, engineering, and ritual align with no margin. What's extraordinary is not what it represents. It's the fact that it didn't collapse before, and that reveals something human. Visible greatness hides invisible strain, decisions with no return, constant risk, continuous pressure, final stability, does not erase the danger. It proves it was overcome, step by step. In the end, it's not just construction, it's the sustaining of complexity, up to the point where everything must be validated at once. And that is rare, because every solid structure hides an invisible process, where everything could have failed, but didn't. And that raises another question. If the city managed to sustain this, what happened later that it could no longer sustain it?